So James, are you there? Okay, great. So James Stewart Jr. is an archivist, blogger, and researcher with a background in digital collections and a lifelong love of radio history. He's conducted research on regional agricultural broadcasting as the archives librarian at North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro. In his spare time, he's constantly researching the history of children's media in the early 20th century, as well as a history of Bible-based storytelling media. He periodically blogs about these histories on his blogs Family Bible Storytelling Media and the Children's Media Archive. He's also co-moderator of the Old Time Radio Researchers Facebook group, a group that works to preserve network era radio recording scripts and related historical documentation. His talk is Hello Children, Are You Listening? Digital Collections and Finding Histories of Children's Radio in the Earliest Days of American Radio. So I'll give it over to James.
All right, thank you, Sean. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. I'm going to start my presentation at the beginning, and this shouldn't take too long. Let's see. Okay. All right, so hello, boys and girls. Are you listening? That is something an announcer would have said to the very first generation of radio listeners. Thank you for joining the session this morning. And I hope, because of time, I'm not able to delve as much as I would like to into research techniques, but I hope to offer a lot of exciting new findings that I pulled together on researching the first generation of children who listen to radio and the first generation of children's programming. This all began with a dream goal that I've had for about a decade. My dream goal is to publish an encyclopedia of American children's radio programs from 1921 to 1960. Along the way to reaching that goal, I've tried to have a lot of small or SMART goals, doing blog articles. I'm trying to work on a peer-reviewed journal article. I've shared at least 24 radio histories through my blogs, Family Bible Storytelling Media and the Children's Media Archive. And as a co-moderator for the Old Time Radio Researchers group, I've shared many of my findings with members of this group and have received a lot of wonderful feedback and a lot of inspiration for how to pursue this goal. For the past 10 years, I've kept a metadata log of children's radio programs that I've come across by studying multiple histories. And I have many of the great old-time radio historians listed at the bottom. Sean, I did not know you were going to be the chair before this presentation. So before I started working on the presentation. So I'm not trying to do extra, but having studied the work of many old-time radio historians, how they collect the work, catalog it, things to look for, and try to find. I started this log with a base of just 70 programs from Jerry Hadig's Old Time Radio research site, but this list has grown to about 245 programs. My presentation today will have emphasis on the first decade, from 1921 to about 1930, a time period where many programs are lost and missing. And I highlight programs from that time period in green because it is as a reminder of trying to dig and trying to find other materials to sort of liven out these histories of missing programs. There are two great milestones that we have. One milestone that we've gone through last year and one great milestone we're going through this year in 2021. The 100th anniversary of broadcast radio. And this fall will be the 100th anniversary of the first program specifically for children. When I began this type of research about a decade ago, a lot of materials that I wanted and needed to use for research, I had to buy from auctions or get from interlibrary loans from other libraries. But over the past 5 years, the 95-year copyright has expired on several materials. So a lot of materials that I paid $40 or more for are now freely available through multiple digital collections. And so the amount of material that we're able to mine and pull and study has doubled. And I want to focus on digital collections also because over the past year, we've gone through the worldwide pandemic. Many archives closed to the public. And so more and more researchers are relying more and more on digital collections. So I wanted to focus more on the types of things I've been able to find from children's programs from the first decade in digital collections, not just schedules, but being able to find out about community histories, um, many cases where there's no audio. Is there film footage available? Are there letters? Are there correspondence? Are there photographs of these personalities? And so I hope to delight many of you today with many surprises that have turned up from digital collections around the country. So I would like to start with what is widely accepted as the first program in all broadcast media for children, The Man in the Moon, a program that premiered sometime between October and November of 1921 over station WJZ in Newark, New Jersey. Today it's WABC. The Man in the Moon was voiced by William F.B. McNary. He was a announcer and station manager for WJZ, station that had just been licensed to broadcast on October 5th, 1921. The author of the stories told on this program was a woman named Josephine Lawrence, a very prolific children's book author. It was supposed to be her program, but in a very famous story, um, she fainted while trying to climb the 15-foot ladder to get to the radio station. You had to climb the ladder through a roof in the ceiling to do the broadcast. She couldn't do it. The children were expecting a story lady, not a, they were expecting someone to go on the air, and someone asked McNary to step in. They were expecting a woman, not a man. So Tommy Cowan, the station manager, looked at the night sky, saw the moon, and said, "Okay, you're going to be the man in the moon," and the rest is history. Looking at early schedules of the Man in the Moon from newspapers, newspapers.com, other newspaper archives, this program caused a sensation. And in the earliest newspaper records, it was not listed clearly at first. You don't really see the Man in the Moon children's stories till about February of 1922. That's where these listings come from. But it was listed in many local papers, especially the Northeastern newspapers in the United States. So we have, in many cases, only Josephine Lawrence received credit, even though her voice was not heard, but she was the author, and she was the children's editor for the Newark Sunday Call that owned WJZ. And what's also interesting is that in many cases, as the popularity of this program grew, there was a copyright in the listings, as you can see from the clip in the bottom. Copyright Newark Sunday Call. Also, a year later, the show was so popular that Josephine Lawrence collected several of these stories in a volume called The Man in the Moon, Stories Told Over the Radiophone. And this book entered the public domain recently. You used to have to pay $150 to get a copy, but now you can look at it through Google Books. And it's also interesting because the stories are by Johnny Gruelle, who is best remembered as the creator of Raggedy Ann and Andy. When I wanted to learn a little bit more about the Man in the Moon program, I was delighted I could look at this book online for free instead of trying to pay for a copy, or trying to get it through interlibrary loan. But what was also very fascinating too is the Newark Sunday Call, the newspaper that owned WJZ and also Josephine Lawrence wrote stories for, was also freely available through Google Newspapers. Google had an initiative to digitize hundreds of newspapers, but it abruptly stopped over a decade ago. And so it's possible to go through Google Newspapers and look at the Newark Sunday Call and find out that they actually had a page just for the children where they could send in their letters to the Man in the Moon. And these letters are really delightful because many of them are from small children as young as 3 and 4 saying that, I believe in Santa Claus. I believe in you, Mr. Man in the Moon. Or Mr. Man in the Moon, I love the story you told the other day about the gingerbread man. Or can you tell this type of story? And from what I've found so far, I don't know if McNary or Lawrence personally answered these letters. I'm hoping that some correspondence exists in family collections because from what I've seen in archival records, no one seems to hold records of either of these two from this time or this radio station from this time period. But Google Books and Google Newspapers has opened the doors to be able to study the first children's radio program in history. Many old-time radio histories have well documented many of the children's book authors and writers who began to come up with their own programs for local stations. Um, from what I could find, the next children's radio program in history were the Uncle Wiggly stories from station KDKA, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And KDKA is, as most of us know, is a very historic station. It's surprising that they weren't the first to do a children's program, but they were, at least they followed it very quickly and had the Uncle Wiggly stories on the air in November 1921. Then you had author David Corey, who would give his Jackrabbit stories. His stories were published in newspapers for children for over 40 years. And the image on the right is a very curious image. It's Jackrabbit and his friends listening to a radio. And the article was too large to include in this slide, but it mentions that you can now hear these stories on the radio. Florence Smith Vincent, who followed up at station WJZ right after The Man in the Moon with her animal bedtime stories. Eunice Randall, she is a legend in Massachusetts broadcasting. She is usually credited as the first female announcer in Massachusetts history. She was briefly known as the Lady of the Lamp in a station up there. And for my research on Bible media, station KDKA made history with the Reverend William A. Logan, who had the first religious program for children in history, his children's Bible stories that used to come on Sunday afternoons. So with The Man in the Moon, you have Uncle Wiggly stories, Lady of the Lamp, and soon after Uncle This, the Dreamtime Lady, these types of storytelling personalities. Radio stations were owned by newspapers, department stores. So you begin to see this more and more, that each station began to have their own personality to promote their store, to promote their newspaper, to promote the community. One big surprise finding going through these newspapers and schedules, because I'm hoping to eventually list chronologically who came after whom. One personality that is not in any radio history that I found is Ethel Rose Taylor, later Ethel Rose Taylor Horsfall. She, from what I could find, may have been the first children's personality on the East Coast. She had a program for about 5 months in Berkeley, California from KKSF. That was the radio station owned by the Oakland Tribune. And she was very popular in the region. She was a school teacher. And her program was so popular that the local paper, the paper that owned the station, had a contest where children could submit photos of themselves listening to her on the radio. So there's about 2 or 3 of these images that I found. And I'll say the history of local children's programming, Bozo the Clown, Pixie Ann, those wonderful personalities, there's more published about that. But we can see, going back to the earliest days of radio, you begin to have that, the local person at the local station, there's contest and engagement for local children. And even the copy of Josephine Lawrence's book, The Man in the Moon, could be considered maybe the first radio premium, in the sense that children, if you love our show, buy this book. Maybe not buy this cereal or buy this soda, but it could be seen about the same lines. Learning about Ethel Rose Taylor and Eunice Randall challenges one widely accepted part of radio history. It's always been given that the first woman to do a children's radio program was Georgine Faulkner, off of station WMAQ in Chicago in 1922. In newspaper listings, I could not find anything for her before April of 1923. However, in WMAQ logs that have been used by researchers for over 60, 70 years, it's widely listed that she began in 1922. So I have that highlighted with the stars behind the word newspapers, because there is a limitation to digital collections, and there's limitations to relying on newspapers. So a person could be on the air frequently, but their name, their personage is not given. But the station log says, yes, this person was on at this time. So there's a limit to using digital newspapers. Looking at The Man in the Moon, Georgine Faulkner and these other storytellers, we see the emergence of kind of the first genre specifically for children, bedtime stories. In fact, the term children's program wasn't really used a lot from what I could see in the first few years. you began to see bedtime stories, children's programs, children's playlists throughout the 1920s. But what's really fascinating about it is looking at it in context of what else was on the air 98 to 99 years ago. Um, so this is one example from the Middleton transcript out of Delaware. So 1922, news bulletins, operas, market reports, government time signals, fashion tips, agriculture reports, church services, and children's bedtime stories. When we think of radio before 1960, the golden age of radio, we automatically think of radio dramas. We think of the War of the Worlds and The Shadow, The Lone Ranger. But for the first year or two, most of radio was information. And so, in a sense, the audience that was listening to operas and these children listen to bedtime stories, they were really the first ones to get to see radio as a storytelling medium. It would still take a year or two, according to most histories, before people understood that you could have sound effects and music to sort of convey emotion and convey a visual image. With The Man in the Moon, The Dreamtime Lady, Uncle Whip, Uncle Bob, it's a long list, Aunt Vivian, children were also the first to have an imaginative host, someone who seemed otherworldly and someone who seemed like Santa Claus or seemed like a person that just could not exist in real life talking to you in your home. I think as radio programs for children began to go more into drama, like Little Orphan Annie and Bobby Benson as Barbie Riders. Before that time, during that time, 1930s, the imaginative host, interestingly, would become more adult. The Shadow for the Street and Smith program, and the Man in Black for suspense, and The Mysterious Traveler. But for children, they were the first to really understand the imaginative, creative person. Hello, boys and girls, are you listening? Who captivates you and tells you a great story. With a lot of these programs for children, they weren't dramas in the sense that we think of them. They weren't. But children were really the first to follow the same storyteller and maybe the same fictional character. It's time for the next Uncle Wiggly story. It's time for the next Radio Boy story. So children were really the first ones to do that. With opera, as far as I know, it just seemed to be special performances, but not an operatic serial where you follow the character. And you don't really see that till the end of the 1920s. And what's interesting with The Man in the Moon, with the book by Josephine Lawrence, is that it was the first program, and as far as I've seen, the only one from the first few years of radio listed with a copyright. Obviously, they knew that children's bedtime stories were spreading. It might have also been to prevent someone else from buying a copy of the book and reading the stories themselves. So it's really children's programs may have been the first to have a sense of, we have to protect the copyright. And I know there were some issues with this when it came to the Uncle Wiggly stories, because anyone could just pick up these books and start reading them on the air. So it's the first genre to have sort of a fight for copyright and to protect, the copyright of the property or the person. Before I talk too much, I want to reassure everyone there is some audio as part of my presentation, and I know I need to speed up. Going back to Georgine Faulkner, I haven't seen anything to really prove or disprove that she was the first female children's storyteller on radio going back to 1922. But she has another milestone. Georgine Faulkner was the first person to do children's records. She did a series of children's records back in 1913 for Victor Records, and many of them have been digitized as part of the Internet Archive. The Internet Archive is massive. I don't have to say that. There's so much on there. But fortunately for this presentation, I was able to acquire one album by Georgine Faulkner that has not been digitized. It's her reading The Gingerbread Boy, and it's from 1913. So if I've done this correctly when I shared my screen, you know what, I might have to let me know in 5 seconds if you can't hear this, because I forgot to select share my sound.
Once upon a time, there was a little old woman and a little old man, and they lived in a little old house. Now, they had no little children, and they were very lonely indeed. And the little old woman said, I'll make me a gingerbread boy, and then I'll feel as though I had a little boy in the house. So she mixed some gingerbread dough, she rolled it out, she cut out her head, she cut out her body, she rolled two long
I don't think people are hearing it.
put them on for legs.
Okay, that means I need to stop and let me reshare. You know, it was selected. Share computer
Yeah,
sound.
I could hear it.
Oh, you're okay. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I
Okay.
got a note that people can. Yeah, you're good.
They're
Sorry to
on a
interrupt.
delay, so it can be a little confusing.
Oh, okay. So let me go. Let me go back. Okay. I'll just start where it was.
Once upon a time, there was a little old woman and a little old man, and they lived in a little old house.
It may
Now,
still
they
be
had
difficult
no
to
little
hear.
children, and they were very lonely indeed. And the little old woman said, I'll make me a gingerbread boy, and then I'll feel as though I had a little boy in the house. So she mixed some gingerbread dough, she rolled it out, she cut out her head, she cut out her body, she rolled two long pieces and put them on for legs, two more and put them on for arms. She took black currants and put buttons all up the front of his coat. She made sugary frosty eyes, sugary frosty nose, and sugary frosty mouth. And the gingerbread boy was smiling. Then she popped him into the oven and shut the door. It was very hot in the oven, and the gingerbread boy wanted to get out. But the
So that was Georgine Faulkner in 1913, about 9 years before her milestone as the first woman to host a children's radio program. One thing I forgot to point out, throughout my presentation, I have several digital collections highlighted in blue. Because of time, I can't show every one, but I wanted people to get a sense of where I'm finding many of these histories. This clipping of her can be found at the Media History Project, digital collection between several different colleges, universities, and the Library of Congress. And this clipping can also be found at worldradiohistory.com, a massive, massive digital collection of radio histories. I'm going to my next slide. And one more surprise find during this research was a woman named Val McLaughlin. Val McLaughlin was known as the Lullaby Lady on Chicago's W station in 1926. Many radio histories only cited her as the Lullaby Lady. But when I began to look more into her life, I found out that she was actually on the air much earlier, possibly as early as 1923. And some of the radio histories at the time credited her as being the first children's broadcaster west of Chicago. In other words, just west of Chicago, or to have such a reach going towards California and Oregon. And so I was fascinated, read more about her, and found out that she had a contract with Brunswick Records. Through Brunswick Records, she did 3 children's albums. And I said, wow, are they out there? And they're not on the Internet Archive. No digital collection has digitized them. And I'm not even sure if the Internet Archive was supposed to digitize Georgine Faulkner's records, but that's another debate. But I was happy to find out that almost all of her albums have been preserved in 3 archives in the country, except one. And I was even happier to find out that this one album that no archive has listed, at least in WorldCat, was available for sale. So I bought this album specifically for this presentation. It's from 1924, and it's Val McLaughlin giving several random playroom jingles. For time, I can only play about a minute. Here we go.
And now, Kitty, the Sandman found some more Mother Goose for you. Did you know that old Mother Goose, when she wanted to wander, would ride through the air on a fine white gander? Mother Goose had a house. It was built in a wood, where an owl at the door 4 sentinels stood. Oh, and here's a funny one for you. If all the seas were one sea, what a great sea that would be. If all the trees were one tree, what a great tree that would be. If all the axes were one axe, what a great axe that would be. If all the men were one man, my, what a great big man that would be. The great man took the great axe and cut down the great tree and let it fall into the great sea. Oh my, what a great splish splash that would be. Now here's one for a wee little baby. Dance, little baby, dance up high. Never mind, baby, mother is by. Throw and caper, caper and throw. There, little baby, there you go. Up to the ceiling, down to the ground. Backwards and forwards, round and round.
Okay, I'm gonna pause it there, and I skipped ahead a little bit. I'm not the I'm not the biggest expert at audio digitization. I've digitized several records before, but I'm finding with these older 78 records, the audio sounds great on the record player, but even at recommended standards for digitizing them, the sound still comes off as very low. So I could try it again toward the end of the presentation. Let's see. Okay. All right, I'm at my 2-minute warning, so I'm gonna zoom through these next few slides. One radio program that I'm really pleased at having done a lot of research on is the KHJ Children's Hour in from Los Angeles, California. KHJ was the radio station of the Los Angeles Times, and a pride and joy of my private collection is this signed volume of Queen Titania's Radio Fairies. This was a book published to promote this radio program. Queen Titania was a character played by Helen Piree. She was a child actress on radio and in a few cases the big screen. The Sandman was her father, Oliver Garrison Piree, who published this book. And Val McLaughlin would promote herself as radio's original Sandman because so many people began to call themselves that. The station manager for KHG, it was John Stewart Daggett, who was affectionately known as Uncle John. And many histories claim that he was the first station manager in California. That's something that I have to look at a little bit more carefully. In trying to find more information about this program, a huge surprise was that in the Internet Archive, in their 35mm stock footage collection, AV Geeks in Raleigh, they've digitized films from around the world. They had a random audio clip of Uncle John Daggett with several of the children who appeared at KHJ. Many of these children not only performed on the radio, but they were also silent film hopefuls. So what's really interesting about this program is it's kind of backwards of silent films. If a silent film is lost, you hope photos and other memorabilia exist. But in the case of this program, none of the audio exists, but finding lots of photos, mementos, postcards, and even film footage. So that's Helen Piree, her father on the left, Uncle John on her right. And I'm running out of time, so I don't have time to show all of this film footage. But I'm going to skip ahead a few slides. And when it came to digital collections, I tried to look very closely at collections available in the Los Angeles area. Two of my favorites are the Margaret Herrick digital collections. Margaret Herrick was the librarian and a leader of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Their digital collections include old casting directories, include the standard casting directory. There were attempts to turn Piree into a movie star, and several of her films are lost today, but one of her films, Sunshine in Paradise Alley, is now available at the Library of Congress. And what's curious about this casting directory is it claims that she was in F.W. Marnoo's Sunrise, legendary silent film, but she's not officially credited in the film. And also, the UCLA is home to the Los Angeles Times Digital Archive. So there are several photos of her and these other children participating in a KHJ garden party. So this is just one example of how one radio program from this time can come to life through 3, 4, or 5, or even 6 multiple digital collections. One more example of this I love from these casting directories, Leland Balter, who was part of the original cast of Bobby Benson and the H-Bar Rangers. The early edition from 1932, 1936 is lost, but we can still look at his entry in the casting directory. Child actress Mitzi Green, first person to play Little Orphan Annie on the screen. Wonderful movie. Somebody needs to preserve it and release it on Blu-ray. She was on the radio, even though this casting directory doesn't acknowledge it. But you can find a lot of radio personalities who are active in Hollywood through these types of documents and materials. I know I need to wrap up, so I'm going to, oops, hit the wrong button. Last thing I'll share with you is a unique way that as radio historians, we can keep the legacies of these individuals alive is to be a bit of a genealogist and update their Find a Grave profiles. For William F.B. McNary, I found that he had 2 profiles at Find a Grave, and I was able to send in corrections so that his 2 profiles could be merged into one. Until a descendant comes along and says, we want to take control of his profile, I actually manage his profile. So I have the freedom to update photos and other things like that so that his life and legacy could be more discoverable. And my very last slide is the page for Val McLaughlin. She married a radio manager named Ralph Van Zyl, and her page is managed by an estate, but I was able to upload these photos from my research to her profile so that her life and legacy could be more discoverable. And that's it for me. I end with some links to research guides from my blog websites, and also a bit of a humor of children's radio. This clip from the Baltimore Afro-American, a little quip about radio's children's programs. You see a lot of these. As soon as the bedtime stories are finished, the kids go out for the evening. Kind of a jab about how many of these programs came on at 4 p.m. and not at bedtime. So I'm stopped for now, so there's adequate time for questions and comments.
Thank you so much, James. This is some really rich research there. You've pulled material from all over the place to reconstruct these histories. Just with that last point, there was a comment by Bill in the chat about the Happiness Boys twisting the dials parody where there's Daddy Scarum who comes on. Do you want to speak a little bit to some of the public response to these programs? Children,
Well,
you know, they're enthusiastic, adults maybe not so much.
It's going through several newspapers and journals and even regional magazines. It's very funny because this is the first generation of children to have a device bringing electronic information in the home. And I see a lot of that throughout the country about how a lot of the children just stay up even more after hearing the bedtime stories. I haven't seen complaints from parents and parent groups. I don't really see that until the 1930s when it came to Little Orphan Annie and other programs that were dramatic and were too violent or too scary. Also the public response, but a lot of it seems to be very humorous. And also that you find some of the first instances of Daddy wants to listen to sports, little Billy wants to listen to the bedtime stories. So a lot of the complaints that parents have had for 100 years do begin in this early period. That's most what I'm seeing so far, but not really complaints as far as those early bedtime stories.
Yeah, and I mean the range of sources that you give us here, right? We can go to film to fill in some of the gaps. You know, we can do the periodical research you've said. You point out a couple of limitations also of each of these sources, right? For being able to, you know, they'll give us some things but not others. We have you know, this cross-platforming basically by some of these newspaper-owned stations, right? That are really trying to synergize, you know, their radio operations and their newspaper publishing.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to learn about. And one clipping I wanted to share, but I actually lost it for the presentation. There was an article claiming that a newsreel company went to WJZ and filmed William F.B. McNary in the studio. So to my knowledge, this film does not exist anymore, and it's tantalizing how many of these stations had behind the scenes newsreel footage that is still in a vault, still in an archive somewhere, or disintegrated years ago. But as time goes on, I'm hoping that more of it reappears.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously one of the limits to digital collections is the copyright issues. Are there things that you would want to call our attention to that are coming up? That we can look forward to being in the public domain soon, or are there things that you would want people to advocate for making more broadly available?
I read this recently, and I hope it's a real article, but there's going to be a change in the public domain laws regarding audio that is either 2022 or 2023, that all audio before 1923 will be in the public domain, because I know that's been an issue before. So that means that archives that may hold more records by these personalities will be able to freely digitize them and put online. And I'm really hoping that Val McLaughlin and Georgine Faulkner were not the only children's personalities to do albums. I've tried to do a lot of digging, and so far they're the only ones that I know of. And even with the KHJ program, there's a photo of John Daggett and Helen Pyrie doing a disc recording. What happened to that disc? And also a lot of the stations, like there was the station WIP, that was Uncle Whip. There's an Uncle Whip book. It's very scarce. That book may enter the public domain in just another year. So year by year, more of the books, other publications that were made will be available. Either Google, a university collection, or library may begin to digitize it. So I hope that each passing year, if there were book premiums and other items, or even film appearances, that they will begin to pop up and turn up in digital collections.
Great, and yeah, as you know, this is one of the radio's earliest storytelling genres. Right?
Oh yeah,
yeah. I'm just going to see if we have any. We do have Tim Brooks asking how important these children's programs were when the network started as well. Did that carry over from these local stations to the early network operations? Did they continue to prioritize these programs in this way?
That's a good question, because there are a lot of myths about children's programs in network broadcasting. A lot of books written in the past don't even start till Little Orphan Annie. So there's like a lot of overlooked programs, like the Dixie Circus that was on the air in 1928, major program out of New York with premiums, Dixie Cups. So a lot of people think there wasn't sponsorship from NBC or anything to 1930, and that's not true. There was also the Gold Spot Pals show Elizabeth Raig, soap opera actress, did when she was a little girl, and as far as I know, the first show to have a African-American co-star, 1927, and that was a nationally famous show with talented children. So from what I've seen, children's programming wasn't seen as very important to the networks at first. And I think it's the success of Little Orphan Annie that really made it something where it was competitive and where all the networks tried to have it. But there is evidence that the networks were trying. NBC, CBS were trying when they first began, 1926, 1927, and began to organize the networks. So it's a history that needs more delving into.
Great. Well, we're going to need to wrap there. James, Mary, Seth, thank you so much for sharing your work with us today. This has been a fascinating set of presentations. So,
thank you.
And just a clarification, recordings of this session are available to conference attendees for 30 days, and then new ORSC members will have access to them starting in September. So thank you everyone for coming today. I think we'll wrap there.